Hey, I'm Ross Parker, a little underdressed. We've got the Hurricane Dorian coming on here, but I'm the owner of Call of Africa's Native Visions Galleries, and I'm the agent for many of our artists. I'm here to talk a little bit about the genius Mopho Gonde and the medium leadwood. Leadwood is one of the hardest, if not the hardest wood in the world. It's called leadwood. If you threw it into the water, it sinks just like lead. These trees grow to about 1,200 years old, and typically most of the trees that Mopho finds are laying in the African bushveld. They've been pushed down by elephants to retrieve the berries on the trees, which gives them nutrients through the winter times, which in turn feeds all the other plains game that come and eat the berries. In the early days, the natives used the leaves, and still do today, of the leadwood tree for medicinal purposes, for treating flus and colds and things like that. The fruit of the tree, obviously, we just said, was eaten by the animals, and they used this wood as a slow burning fuel to light their fires, because once you light one of these big leadwood logs, it'll smolder all day long. The ash from those fires was used for toothpaste and also as a whitewash to paint their pole and mud huts that they used to build to keep the termites off. So the great thing with Mopho is that he doesn't cut down any living trees, and we wouldn't carry his work if he did. Now, once he gets into the bush, he works with a team of guys. They walk in an extended line, just like a military line, because in the tall grass you can often walk past a tree that's laying down in the bushveld. But he dissects every tree trunk that he finds, because typically when a tree dies, the outside of the tree dies away, the bark, and then years later on the heart of it, or the pith, that rots away, and you end up with a hollow trunk, and obviously that's no good for his sculpture. So he has to find solid trees, and about 30% of all the trees he finds are hollow inside. Once he finds a solid log that he can use, he then whittles it down in the shape of a particular animal that he's intending to do. And this is done first by using 5 or 6 different sized chainsaws. He uses then a very large Dremel to, once he gets back to his studio, to reduce that formed piece or unsculpted piece to a very smooth rendition of the animal that he's going to do. Then for the furred animals, what he does is he uses a jeweler's disc to create all the fur on the different furred animals. And then with the pachyderms, or elephants and hippo, he then uses a tool that he invented himself to do all the skin and the veins on the back of the elephants and everything else. Now, the only way you can carve this wood is by using tungsten carbide steel. If you use regular steel, it will just burn up and will never cut into the wood. The tusks on all the animals are either warthog tusks, or in the case of many of the elephants, he uses kudu horn, the bone from inside the kudu horn, so there is no use of ivory anywhere within his work. One of the things that Mopho always references when people tell him how great an artist he is and what a great piece he's just finished, is he always asks the clients, well, what about this? And he talks about the base. As he says, for me to create a wildlife piece is the easy process. His most difficult challenge is to find the bases. And these bases he uses now are really conversation pieces, because this is what the tree looks like in its deceased state, lying in the African bushveld, almost in a petrified form. In the early days, he did these bases to the back here, where he did a lot of reliefs in the actual wood of fallen trees, rocks, aloes, and things like that. And I originally told him, listen, Mopho, you know, do you want to be more prolific? And he looked at me and said, what are you, God? And of course I was laughing and said, no, you've got to find a new way to do these bases. And of course he came up with this idea of using the outside of a fallen tree. But like I say, this is his most difficult challenge, is to find these bases to put his actual sculpture on. We then create these additional bases which the piece locks into, which are made out of Rhodesian teak, which came from the original railroad ties that were laid down in the late 18th century when they built the railroad from Cape to Cairo. We call it rail antique because this wood has sat under the railroad lines for over 100 years. Many of the pins that we took out of this wood were stamped 1887. So this is Rhodesian teak, also very hard, has weathered the African climate and all the years of the elements for over 100 years, and they make beautiful, wonderful bases to accompany each of Mopho Gonde's works. We trust that you'll really enjoy this man's work, one of the greatest geniuses that we have discovered in 34 years of being in business, and we think his program has gone all the way to the moon.